University of Missouri CERI Center, which is the Center for Cyber Education Research and Infrastructure. So with that, I want to get started on what we're going to do today and what we'll be up to for the next, I would say, 90 minutes or so. So this webinar series is the first of the webinar series that I've done with SBDC, and this is the first webinar that you're here today. And we're trying to provide some insights into the modern cyber threats. So we all have online cyber assets, and as we all know, we see the news every day. It's critical to protect those assets online. And so this talk hopefully will give you a insight into what are the modern attacks that are happening and how to really think about making a plan for cyber defense for anything that you have online, and make sure that your business has increased productivity, has cost savings. So you don't want to overdo the security part also. So you want to kind of give you a right sense of what's a good security strategy, and then ultimately reduce the cyber risk that keeps your business growing and prospering. So this is the first webinar where I call this understanding your business's security position. So knowing what's out there in the modern attack world and knowing where you stand. I think that's the first webinar's goal. And we'll start with that, and then there's a number of other seminars that will really build on this idea. So in the second webinar, we'll talk about how do you go about designing your security with some best practices. And then we'll go into how to get ready to face the adversary in terms of preparation with incident response and all that. And then how do you really engage or try to even maybe feel like you're not engaged, and the attacker feels like it's not worth for him to or her to continue the attack, right? So how you can outsmart your adversary. So we'll talk about that sort of defense by pretense and other kind of interesting ideas in webinar 4. And the last one will give you this more of a long-term roadmap of how to plan for cybersecurity for your business. So it's going to be exciting series of webinars, and today is the first one. And in the next 90 minutes or so, like as I said, we'll have a number of things we will do. So you'll have obviously some step where I will engage you on this topic idea and hear from you a little bit. And then I'll go into the content I want to tell you today about modern attacks and knowing how to think about your cybersecurity gaps in your business. And then we'll have some group discussion followed by a little bit more of concepts to wrap it up. And then towards the end, I will give you like a sort of an exercise. It's a light exercise. It's not heavy exercise. I know it's all going to be lunchtime by the time we get there. It's something that will get you thinking, and I think it will help you beyond this webinar. So if you take that document and think about it more carefully and answer the questions, you might get more out of it even after the webinar. And then we'll close strong. So we'll come up with what are the takeaways from this talk that would benefit you. So this is the plan. So let's get started. So the topics, as I said, is basic stuff that I'm going to talk about in terms of cyber attacks. Some commonly seen attack scenarios occurring today, and knowing what it means for your small business, right, in terms of preparation and knowing where your gaps are, right? So this is kind of what we're going to talk about, and we'll do a little bit case study at the end. So before I get going on talking more, I wanted to get a sense from all of you as to where you come from, right? So so can we please initiate the poll? Jason, Angie, Roshan, anybody, all of you are welcome to answer it.
Prasad, I did answer those questions, but it's not allowing me to submit it. I'm having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
Jason, I tried too, and it's probably because you're a host. That's what I looked at. It might didn't answer the polling questions either, but I was listed as a co-host, and I'm guessing that's why.
This is
No
Angie. I
worries.
was able to submit it.
That's good. Okay, so we can see the results here. So that's good. We have a combination of yes and no for, do you follow news stories on cyber attacks routinely? So every day there's something going on, right? A couple of days, somebody said, oh, did you see the Park Mobile app attack? There's something going on all the time. And I hope we all have had some idea of how to read what goes on when there's a cyber attack and understand from the news. So, I hope some of you have some idea of a background through a course or through your own learning about how to interpret what's going on in sort of the world, right, in terms of cyber attacks. And this is interesting. Have you experienced an attack? At least there's a couple of people, maybe. We can talk more about that. And do you have a plan? I'm glad at least a couple of you have a plan. So we can stop sharing this. So let's talk a little bit about this, right? So, I'm one who will look at a news story, and if it's a cybersecurity related thing, there's a lot of it going on. But if it's something significant, I'll spend a little bit of time. So I don't know about others, but have I experienced a cyber attack, or have I known somebody who has experienced an attack? I think all of us at some level have had some interesting experience. We see when our bank accounts being, compromised sometimes. So that's even something we can call as a cyber attack, right? If somebody was abusing your debit card without your consent. But let's hear some more stories. So does anybody want to share an attack that they firsthand experienced, or where, they knew somebody who was experiencing it firsthand?
Well, Prasad, I'll share. I had an experience when a large national bank that I used to bank with started offering email transactions to where you could send money to someone via email. And that system, someone got a hold of my bank information at 8 p.m. on a Friday evening, transferred about $180 out of our bank account. And thankfully, I had my email notification set up. And so I received an email about it within about 30 minutes from it happening. But with it, at that time, it was 8:30 on a Friday night. The banks were closed. We were going into the weekend. So I was scrambling to try to contact customer service, which when I got to the bank's customer service, they said, I'm so sorry, that department leaves at 5 o'clock on Friday and won't be in until Monday. And so thankfully, this branch did have Saturday hours, of course, very limited Saturday hours, but my husband and I collected, all of our bank information that we had, and we rushed to the bank on Saturday morning. And we were able to get someone to help us to freeze the account. They promptly gave us new debit cards and different things. But in addition to that, we were actually advised to go ahead and contact the police department to, put in to make a formal, get formal documentation of the incident. And we did have some follow-up with the bank for about 2 weeks because we were trying to make sure that all of our bank account was closed and that things had been appropriately moved over, because of course we had direct, like, auto pay set up on things. So there were, issues there, but they worked with us great. And really all they could tell us was at that particular time, in general, there was a lot of activity coming out of Mexico. but that, most likely they weren't going to be able to find anybody or, really pinpoint, who the culprit was. But it was a very stressful about 12 hours before we got into the bank. And then following that, it was pretty stressful, just because of trying to make sure things were closed down and try to get monitoring for our social security numbers and things. We've had a couple other instances. Of course, I think everyone's pretty much been privy to a healthcare breach of some sort. So I feel like we've had identity monitoring for like 7 or 8 years, just due to some of the different things that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that, Sherry. And that's exactly what the point there is. If you experienced it, it's pretty distressing as it's happening. You don't know how to react to it because the whole point of the incident is it's surprise. And whatever you're trying doesn't work sometimes, most times. And so you are figuring out what's going on, and so that anxiety is high. And even then, when you get through that incident, right, maybe it goes away or you found a way to defend yourself against it. There is this whole aftermath of what else could have been compromised. Is this going to happen again? There's a lot of rethinking or resetting your infrastructure, I would say, in terms of coping with what happened, right, with the cyber attack. So it is pretty rough experience if you've gone through something like that.
Prasad, I'd like to share. We have seen a lot of security breaches over the years. Most recently, the Microsoft Exchange web shell incident with the Hafnen Group. I think it's kind of interesting how they targeted the on-premise Microsoft Exchange servers. And I kind of explain it where they got into these servers, and it's like going into a house and unlocking a window and you're not sure which window they're unlocking, right? We had 3 different businesses that were infected by this event, and they were in 3 different verticals. The response was a little bit different. But one thing is for sure is that in any incident, you have to start by containment, and you don't want that to spread. So one of the things that you have to do is shut down email in this incident and not allow it to flow. So that business interruption, you think about how we all depend on email, and what impact that could have while you're then moving to a forensics type stage. But I also think it's interesting that if you pay attention to the news, the FBI received a court order to go in and log into servers remotely for those organizations that did not patch for that vulnerability. So pretty serious, and it can impact just about any business, not just, and not referring specifically to the web shell incident with Microsoft Exchange, but cyber threats as a whole can impact any business.
Absolutely. Yeah, anybody else want to share a story? Yeah, I think we have a sense, right? Yeah, go ahead, anybody else? All right, so the point is, it is stressful. It's a lot of issue for a company in terms of your reputation, especially for a large company. Even a small business has a lot of impact. And in some cases, if it's network-based, server-based, you kind of want to really rethink everything you have out there because you don't know what else has been compromised. So it's a lot of aftermath issues that you deal with. So it does really matter to have a plan of what are you going to do, what if you are subjected to it, and how are you going to deal with it. So it's good to start planning. And so hopefully this webinar will get you in that process. So let's go into some concepts, which I think are important, and then we'll have a little bit more thinking on things that I've presented through the concept talks. So we'll go through a couple of concepts first, and then we'll go to the last one towards the end of the talk after the group discussion. So we'll talk about modern cyber threats and hacker motivations these days, right? So what do they look like? So who is online today? Which business is online today? And the answer is everybody. And we've heard the story. Most people who are online are also going to the cloud, right? So they not only have a web presence, but they're using increasingly cloud-based services. And something like 90% of all online businesses have some kind of a cloud component that lets them scale, that lets them support large critical users and users. And the industries that are affected, are everybody, right? From the online retail to consumer apps to healthcare to gaming to advanced manufacturing. Anybody who's doing anything online is becoming a subject to these cyber attacks. And we're all building hopefully some kind of systems to run our business. Like we talked about mail servers, or we're talking about an online web server, or other systems that help the productivity of the business, right? So we would always worry about, okay, let's get this working so that these many people at these times can use it in these certain ways. And then, by the way, let's put some passwords and put some access control on that set of resources we have made online accessible, right? But that's not going to work today, right? More and more, the issues of cybersecurity are so important that we probably think of security first before we even think of what is the system we're going to put online. And maybe we do it jointly also, right? We think about security and the system design at the same time today that we use, right? And the thing that is kind of interesting in how we're dealing with an attack is, in the old days, we would have these viruses or worms or whatever you want to call them, make a whole splash. You have this walker virus that has somebody walking across the screen, or there'll be this big red sign that says, "Oh, your system is infected." But today's attacks are not like that. So I encourage you to look at this very nice TED Talk and this resource link. We'll be sharing these slides so you can actually read more. But today's attacks are what we call as more advanced and persistent. So the attackers don't reveal themselves. So they are finding ways to remain in your systems and continue to extract data or resources that provide value to them as an attacker, and it's hurting your business, right? So we don't have these flashy, splashy attacks, like we had in the past. So this is one thing that has happened. And if you look at what are sort of the more modern ways in which online businesses are compromised, ransomware is one. So we'll talk more about that. There are apps we use that essentially are tied to our bank accounts that could be compromised. And increasingly, cyber attacks are a business in the black market, right? So people can buy services to launch attacks, and if it's not working, you call the customer service. So this is really happening out there, which is again very, very scary. And we're also consuming a lot of news about COVID-19 and other things, and misinformation, clicking on links again can cause issues of malware being installed on your systems. And last but not the least, but we're all using a lot of IoT devices that are in personal spaces that are hardly updated. And we've seen those being used to launch attacks as well. And then there are a number of other ones where you're, having the attacker call you and try to get information through social engineering, or they're trying to run cryptocurrency mining scripts on your computer. That's one of those things that at one point was more popular than ransomware. So whenever the Bitcoin value goes up, you see these cryptojacking attacks go up. And last but not the least, the hackers have access to enormous resources. And so they're launching AI-based attacks, artificial intelligence-based attacks, which are very, very hard to defend against. So to add to the natural, to add to the human man-made causes of disasters of cybersecurity incidents, right? You can even add the natural reasons. So nature has put us in a pandemic, and that has again shifted completely how we think about how we operate our business, how we access our systems. And so when we spend all these years, optimizing our security for systems where people were on site, and they were accessing these services from a particular location has completely been flipped around. So we're seeing everybody being more remote. And so the security that you had planned and optimized and hardened in the past needs to be completely rethought to this sort of a new setup that you have with all the remote work and the new kind of services that you're using to allow for that remote work. And so you saw when the pandemic hit, a lot of the industry people I work with, they were all moving to the cloud, right? And they were upgrading their remote access resources, bandwidths, their load balancers. And so there's a lot of work that went towards migrating to the cloud. And again, this is a completely new system that we have. And it's not optimized, hardened like the way we have done it for several years in the past. So this is added to how cybersecurity threats have become more aggravated, right? And why are we scared about attacks? Who are these people who are really after us, right? So the people who we are scared are, call them hackers or whatever, right? And you've seen enough movies, I guess, to know these kind of tendencies where, somebody's trying to outsmart somebody else. And in this case, they're outsmarting them in a very malicious way. So the hackers always find a way. So you never think, like you see in this cartoon below, a bird can drink out of a straw. But the hackers will show you they can do it, right? So they always will find a way. And so it's like they say in the termite world, right? You will be a business who has been hacked or will be hacked soon or in the future are a good candidate to be hacked, just like they say for the termite is already there or will be soon, or you will have termites, right? So this is the same idea, and it's really important to know how to prepare for this. And people used to do it for entertainment, social acceptance. Fraud is obviously a great motivator for the hackers. Ransomware stuff is another great motivator, but increasingly we're seeing these, state-sponsored attacks on our infrastructures, on our businesses, on our education institutions, on our governments. And Richard Clarke, who led the 9/11 Commission, actually told in 2010 that the cyber wars are coming. They are the next threat to national security, and we have dealt with this in the last 2 elections, right? And this is becoming really serious and very sophisticated. So the people who are launching attacks are wonderfully professional and organized, and they go buying these services to knock people offline to try to take advantage. So everybody is attacked, and more companies that are providing online services are the more frequent ones to be attacked, and some make big news, right? So I'll share a couple of old news and the new news, right? The hack of the century, as sold by Fortune, was the Sony Pictures hack, where Sony produced this movie, The Interview, and there was a plot of some North Korean dictator being shown in bad light, and they threatened to stop that screening, and they took down Sony, right? So they attacked Sony, put out all their intellectual property online, and Sony had to really just completely redo their network and systems to deal with this. And obviously the reputation of Sony was hurt. And in this case, whoever tried to come to help, they were being attacked. Like Microsoft came to help and they were attacked. And ultimately, President Obama made a statement at that point saying, this is a matter of national importance because our economy, our prowess in technology is being challenged, and we should be able to come out strong. So we did actually, and this was actually successfully screened, and we did really come out of this crisis, but it happened at a level that was really very shocking. But as I said, those sensational attacks happen all the time, but a lot of the attacks these days are advanced and persistent. They happen without us knowing that we are attacked. And sometimes these attacks can take 3 years, 4 years to know that we're actually in a compromised infrastructure, right? Or our systems are compromised, or our data is being exfiltrated. So these are done very cleverly. And some of the latest examples you've seen, and this has really caught the whole US government and companies off guard, and they're really trying to figure out, is this SolarWinds attack we saw recently in the news, which is a kind of an advanced persistent threat. And it's a supply chain attack, and SolarWinds is a very popular software used to monitor all your systems and networks, and it has visibility about a lot of your services. So this was something that a lot of government organizations use, and that very popular software having all these attack malware being initiated was a huge problem, right? So we see these large-scale attacks, obviously, which are of big news, big concern, but the fact is small businesses are always also targeted. And here you see, about 30% of all the attacks are on these small businesses, especially in the manufacturing industry. They're after IP, they're after, all of the IoT stuff, Internet of Things that we are adopting in these kind of environments. So these are, again, leading to a sort of a new wave of cyber criminals who are, not only just your people who are after your website or trying to launch attacks to make a statement, but we're seeing insider threats within the government, within organizations. We're seeing large, very well funded, very well organized groups like Anonymous and others taking on some kind of pseudo causes to really launch attacks. And you have state-sponsored attacks, which are even more sophisticated, where the governments are after other countries, citizens and other services, right? So this is really a very difficult situation we are in. So hopefully you're starting to get scared, but it gets a little bit more scary before we start talking about solutions. But it is a very dire situation, and a lot of things can go wrong, right? As we talked about what can happen when you're attacked, all the way from your bank account being stolen. You could have your servers compromised. Somebody can get what calls privilege escalation. They can do very high privilege operations that could affect your business. They could go after your databases. They could, like I said, listen to everything that's going on and do bad things with that information that's being gleaned. They can affect your network connectivity. They can even lead things to where you feel like you're talking to somebody or doing something, but it's an impersonation that's going on, and all those kind of problems. So this is a real serious issue, and more the modern attacks try to really hide all these intrusion activities, right? So if you're using intrusion detection system, they try to make sure that that's turned off so that you can catch them, and they try to maintain access. They try to exploit your system by being persistent. So to really kind of go a little bit more deeper in what do they do, right? To understand what are the types of attacks that they actually do, we can think of two broad categories. One are passive attacks and other are active attacks. In the passive attack, as the name says, the attacker is not doing anything to catch your attention, but they are silently observing, right? They're eavesdropping or monitoring what's going on, and then that could be used then to launch an active attack, right? So once they know what are your critical assets, and then they really want to shock you, right? They could do the active attack. And then they could do things like replay messages, masquerade messages, modify messages, or even just flat out deny service for all your assets. So a little bit comic book interpretation of what happens. So the passive attacks, one of the basic ones is interception, which is called sniffing, where the attacker here, Darth, is in the channel between Bob and Alice, and Darth is able to read all the contents going between Bob and Alice, right? So they're capturing these live streams as the flows go across the network. They can observe what's going on, right? If you have a phone call, they can listen to it. If there's a video stream, they can decode it and run it. So if you're not using encryption, literally they can replay all the things you're doing on the network. And they can even spoof. So then they can block the delivery of the original message, right? And then take that message and then fabricate it and send it to the receiver, intended receiver. And this is something we see in session hijacking, our website defacing kind of attacks. And there can be a combination of this, right? The sniffing and the spoofing, they could use a combination. And once they know what is more critical or what is important to you, then they could launch these attacks, which are more active attacks, like replay attacks. They could do modification of messages and make these attacks analysis. And so, these are kind of the ways in which attackers really bring this, kind of a situation where we need to have a plan what we will be doing if we are in fact, subject to a cyber attack. So at this point, I think let's go into a little bit of a deepening thinking kind of a situation. So before I go into a group discussion on a question, so Jason and Angie, do you want to maybe share a few more ideas? Since you're on the field, you work with actual small businesses, as you said, in the middle of helping them deal with these attacks. So who wants to go first? Angie, you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I really think it's important at this point in time to reiterate having a plan. The best way to protect yourselves from attacks like these is to be proactive. After an attack, it's a lot of aftermath and cleaning up and trying to get things back on track. It's so much easier to be proactive about it. I always tell small businesses and even our state agencies, have a plan in place. Know what to do if you come into work one day and your computers are encrypted and you can't get to anything. Know who to call. Know if you have cybersecurity insurance. Know if you're going to pay the ransom if it's a ransomware attack, or if you're not going to. And if you are going to, who's going to pay that? So these are some questions as you're asking yourself. If you don't know the answers to them, it would be a good idea to get with your agency or your business and your cyber people and kind of ask these questions. And if they don't have plans, then come up with an incident response plan. And not only create that incident response plan, but exercise it. So you know that it works on paper and off paper. The first time you exercise your plan, you don't want it to be the day that you need it. So make sure that you're exercising those plans and do it often, every 6 months or yearly, so that you can update, because cyber changes every day, and probably the technologies you're using probably change, every few months. You may have a new vendor for something. You may be using a different software for something else. So all needs to be updated in the plan and then exercised as you go along.
That's a great point. And one of the key things she said is start before things. So if there's a fire in your house, you don't start digging a well. That's actually saying in India, we say. So you need to really have a plan. And that's very well put there. Thanks, Angie. And Jason, please go ahead.
So I think you did a great job, Prasad, laying out the foundation for this webinar series here. I'd like to add that, back in 2012, Robert Mueller came out and said that there's really two types of businesses: those that have been hacked, those that will be hacked. And then that's slowly changing over to those that have been and those that will be hacked again. And it's just not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's just when it's going to happen. And Angie and I see that happen on a regular basis. The list of threats that you put on there, one of the things that I would like to mention is, if you look back at the FBI IC3 statistics that they track, over the years, it has some great information in there. And one of that I would like to point out is just how these attacks continue to increase. The amount of money that they're generating, continues to increase. And saw a statistic once that said, hey, if you were investing in the stock market and you saw a business that over the last 5 years grew by 513%, would you invest in that business? And most of us would probably say yes, that would be a company that we would want to invest in. These cyber criminals, they operate like a business, and they have had a 513% success on just phishing, and over 300% increase in the last 5 years in monies gained. Last year in 2020, just off of business email compromise, they made over $1 billion. So these businesses are not going away, and the victims generally are American companies. And so that is why you really have to start considering this. Like Angie said, you have to have a plan. There's not a silver bullet, and there's not one thing that's going to protect you. Security comes in layers. And Angie, you know, I agree with her. It's that saying, an ounce of cure is worth a pound, or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's so true in cybersecurity. One of the biggest threat vectors is the human side of things, and that comes in you know, social engineering that Prasad talked about. We also have insider threats. I think about the story of the water system that was very prominent in the news, you know, a few weeks ago from Florida, where they had a remote connection in and they changed that. Well, not so far away from the state of Missouri is a little town in Kansas, up by Kansas City, has a population of about 3,000 people. They just had an insider threat, an employee that did the same thing. They changed the chemical mixture of their water supply. So, which fits into some of those things that Prasad was kind of pointing out. We also think about social engineering, how they can pick up a phone and persuade employees to hand over the keys to the kingdom in their passwords. It's very, very simple. You don't have to go look very far back, and you see how Twitter was social engineered by a high school student. That high school student was able to then manipulate and log in and send tweets from, you know, the blue check mark accounts, and was able to actually collect, you know, electronic currencies paid to him. So again, no silver bullet. You have to really prepare. One of those things is by sitting in webinars like this or training your employees. And you know, I'm excited to continue to learn more with you and your team, Prasad.
Thanks, Jason. And the great point you made that these cyber criminals are a great business plan, right? They have a great business plan, and they're going to continue to do it. And they're very well organized. And there are so many markets that feed to this really, you know, nefarious behavior, and people can get away with it because of our laws, because of, you know, national boundaries, and in most cases, even when you want insurance, you need to have a plan. Like Nanji was saying, if you're not monitoring and you don't have a baseline of how your company was when it was not attacked, you cannot say that I have been attacked. You can't just say, hey, I saw this problem once, you know, I need compensation. You know, the courts don't allow that, right? If you know the legal process, you can't do hearsay. You need to have evidence in how you're monitoring and how you have, you know, kind of created a state of normalcy of your organization before the attack over a long period of time. And then you can say, now this is abnormal, right? So for even that reason, monitoring is going to be very critical, even if you want to go back and get insurance or compensation, like Angie was talking about those things, which is also a very important point here. So, so we'll get into the things that will be more related to the planning and how to get a plan in place and all those things later. But at this point, it's good to at least acknowledge that we're dealing with a very sophisticated set of cyber criminals. We will need a plan, and it is going to happen, right? If it's not already happened, a cyber attack is impending. So good to be prepared. So I think this is a great point. And so now let's have a little bit of a group discussion.
Prasad,
so, yes.
Real quick, we do have a question in the chat. The question is, SMEs, do they operate more proactively or reactively in cyber?
As far as I am aware, a lot of things go in proactive planning. Like we just said, prevention is better than cure, or an ounce of prevention is better than, you know, whatever, a lot of, you know, cure. And so that's what we're going to focus later in the webinars as we progress into concepts that are more deep, is we will create a proactive strategy, and a strategy where we have awareness of our people, our assets, our cybersecurity position, and the investment that we have put in making sure that we are at some point where we say we can tolerate the risk. And I'll get to those parts of the webinar, but you cannot be 100% safe. There's nobody who can be 100% safe. So we all need to do our jobs and still be secure. So in many cases, trying to add security really comes in the way of our jobs. Obviously, going through airports, we've found that it's important that airports are secure, but I don't think anybody enjoys going through all the airport security every time they're trying to catch a plane. So finding the balance, knowing what risk you're willing to tolerate, all requires a very proactive strategy. Now, the reactive strategy is something, again, which is likely to help, right? In one example I'll give you, there was an attack on our city of Columbia. There was a Bitcoin baron kind of an attack where the city had supported a cause and this person didn't like that support, and he launched an attack on the city's website, and wherever you pay bills for water and other utilities, that website went down. And literally what you could do at that point is, just wait for the attack to go away. There was not much you could react in that sense. So if you think of City of Columbia as like a small, medium business trying to collect bills, some of the suggestions that were given was, hey, how are you running your systems? We're running it in our private data center, and we don't have a lot of intrusion detection. We don't have load balancers. So we don't have some of these services to deal with these kind of denial of service attacks. So, again, they knew we could go to cloud, but they thought it was too expensive to do that at that point. I don't know the current situation, but if you do go to a cloud platform and host your services, there's a lot more you can do, because the cloud providers provide what we call as APIs or services that allow you to customize your security much better than you running your own server in your data center. So the reactive mechanisms, and we will show them in our later webinars also, are really more effective or possible if you really are in the cloud versus you're trying to run your own data center. But again, as a small business, medium business, the cloud strategy may not always work out, or maybe may not be cost effective. So there are challenges, and it's a matter of trade-offs. And I even call them as cybersecurity dilemmas. We'll talk more about in some of the later content. But it's a great question.
And Prasad, if I may, I'd like to offer an answer to that question as well in conjunction with yours. But we see in the field that most businesses that have not been hit really sometimes operate more reactively when it comes to cyber, and the ones that I see that are more proactive have either been hit previously, where they've had something happen, maybe not a large scale, but something kind of small, a scare of some sort, or this SME is in some sort of compliance type, industry, whether that's healthcare, whether that's finance. Now we're even see the Department of Defense is regulating their manufacturers under the CMMC rules. So unfortunately, that's kind of like, to Angie's point, is why you need to plan. And sometimes what we see is that they mistakenly say, oh, my IT department's got that, or my IT guy's got that. And they don't, the leadership doesn't ask the right questions. And we're seeing that shift now to where more and more responsibility is put on the leadership level, whether you're a business owner, whether you serve on a board. They're saying that you have to treat cybersecurity as you would your fiduciary responsibility if you're a board member. And so, again, at this point in the game, we see a lot of organizations still approaching cyber in a reactive standpoint, but it is quickly changing as their insurance companies are coming to them and saying, hey, you have to have cyber liability insurance, as they see other vendors or other peers being hit. So I think that it's shifting in the right direction. I saw a study just not too long ago that said only 38% of businesses have a disaster recovery plan in place. I'm curious to see what that's going to look like at the end of 2021. So a lot of room for improvement, and unfortunately, again, I hate acting out of reactive, and I think Angie would agree with that, is having that plan that's in place and you test it, at least you have a plan, when you get hit.
Great points. Thanks, Jason. Angie, you want to add to that?
No, I'll just echo what Jason said. Definitely have your plan, because once you get hit, it's a lot harder to clean up than it would be to be proactive. And I know being proactive costs money, and you have to get people to understand that they need to put money towards this, because if you don't put money towards it proactively, then on the other side of things, you're going to pay a lot more on the other side when you're hit.
Yeah, exactly. The challenges are really there. And then there are misconceptions also, in the sense that, how much security strategy should be in place, right? It's easy to get really carried away that, we need a lot of security. But there is a point at which you say, well, this is going to hurt us. So there are, again, some kind of a balance that you need to strike between how much security you need and how much you really just need to do your business, right? So this, obviously, that kind of a misconception that needs to be dealt with.
We do have another question in the chat.
Yes.
And this is one I think a lot of folks have on their mind. It's about remote employees, and so there are a couple things here. So, do remote employees need to do more than just log in via a company VPN? Do the employees need to do more in protecting their own home internet?
That's a great question. And in fact, I'll talk about it next. We call these as what I call attack surfaces, and your remote employees have attack surfaces, your systems have attack surfaces that they're accessing. And it could be your network, it could be your system, it could just be the person, like we talked about social engineering attacks. So VPN or even encryption as a solution definitely is important, but that doesn't really mean you're protected all around, because the idea is you can really, as a organization, try to find as many ways to protect systems, networks, and humans, but the attacker just needs one vulnerability to really make a difference, right? To really impact your business. So yes, there are obvious things you should be doing, which is like VPN, and we'll talk more about it in the next part of the concept talks. But having sort of a plan, like we just talked about, knowing what could go wrong and how to quantify the impact of what could go wrong when it goes wrong, and having the right investments to have the protections in place is going to be a very deliberate strategy. It can't just be a simple yes or no question or a easy decision. So we'll talk a little bit more into that aspect, but yes, we should be doing things that are best practices. But again, protection essentially will need to go beyond best practices. It needs a very deliberate planning about what are your attack surfaces and what are the ways in which an exploit can have high, medium, low impact, and what are you going to do about if that threat really becomes real. So Jason, you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add, Prasad, is that back to what I said earlier, there's no silver bullet. There's not one thing that can protect you. And a VPN is kind of like a minimum. I mean, for remote employees, I mean, if they're having to connect back to their environment at the office, I think a VPN is just like a baseline. And there's other layers that need to go into that. Like Prasad said, the attack vectors, they're just looking for one opening. For those that are at home, one of the things that we always recommend is you don't want to mix business with personal. So if your organization can issue a dedicated laptop or device that they use just for work, so you're not doing other things at home, like searching the internet or logging into your social media, things like that. But anytime you can keep those separate, helps, and having up-to-date you got to have up-to-date patches on all of your devices. You need to have, your antivirus, and there's other layers of security that you can do. But I would say VPN is a minimum for those that are trying to connect back to the office.
Prasad, I have a quick example of what Jason was talking about with the VPN and remote workers. About a year ago, probably, I received a alert from the Secret Service saying that we had a malware that was calling out to a C2 on one of our 8 state computers. So when we went to run, and usually we don't get those alerts from the Secret Service, so it was pretty intense. We went to track down that computer, and it was one of our remote employees, and that did not get onto the network while she was on the VPN. That was on her home network. It had happened just because of, kids using the network and things like that. And she managed to use her work machine not on the VPN. So therefore that malware was downloaded onto the work machine. And then when she logged into the VPN, that wasn't helpful. So I would say, yes, you need to be practicing best practices and all the end user training, such for your normal internet, for your home internet, and for your kids as well. Make sure you know what they're doing on devices and that they're not downloading games that have malware or different things like that in it, because it could affect your remote employees.
Yeah, that's great sort of extra information. And, like Jason was saying, there are these best principles or best practices, layering. He talked about isolation, right? Keeping things separate. Like we talked about what could go wrong. Most of the major issues happen when there's privilege escalation. So, giving people only as much privilege they need to do their job, right? That's another best practice. So not giving people too much access to everything. That's another way to be more careful. So we'll talk about some of these, what I call as security design principles in actually webinar 2. We'll actually show you a demonstration of a real application of how that is all put together. But at the minimum, we should be doing the best practices and then and more. So we'll talk more about it in this and in the future webinars also. Thank you, James and Daniel, for those questions. Any other questions? Okay, so with that, maybe we'll go to the kind of a group discussion, and maybe Daniel and James, you can unmute and talk about, as a small business, are you thinking about a cybersecurity strategy? What do you see some of the benefits are? What are some of your challenges? Are they challenges that are more legal issues or costs? So would you be willing to share?
I can go first.
Please.
And maybe my comment won't be very useful for the group because of the specific reason of why I'm connecting to this seminar. And thank you very much for the invitation. I think that the information has been really great and very useful. So I work on international development, and I'm currently working on an assignment related to cybersecurity and SMEs. So that's why I was asking about the perspective, from your perspective, about how you see SMEs acting more either reactively or proactively. So my interest in attending here is to learn more about what companies need to be thinking about and how companies can plan more effectively to address these challenges, but with a very particular lens, because SMEs in the United States are very different than SMEs in Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America. and their needs and their views and their business culture is very different. So it's very helpful for me to listen to all of these, because in some ways we affirm what I'm already thinking about the issues, but also opens new questions that I think are worth exploring. So yeah, I would leave it at that.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great point of limitations also come from the kind of country you are in, right? Not only the type of business you are, or the legal issue that your business has to deal with, but just sort of the environment internationally could also be a factor. A great point. Thank you so much. James, I'm just curious, do you want to share something? That's fine. So, like we talked about, the cybersecurity strategy is going to be different for a different kind of a business, and issues. Obviously, cost is a big factor, right? So if you look at things, what we want to essentially achieve is protect our data just from the flyer. Obviously, we want to prevent theft or damage to our equipment and systems. We want to avoid major disruptions. We want to protect employee personal information. We want to shield our organizations from negative publicity. And this last very important point is plan IT budgets and policies with adequate cyber incident response. So, this is all important as you have the considerations, and the benefits are obviously in those considerations, but the limitations really, are going to be different for different organizations. And so, what I hear is definitely cost is one, and sometimes even legal issues. So if you're a business in healthcare, you have to, really be compliant with a lot of the healthcare related laws or standards. If you're working for a federal government, you're a contractor, there are again standards like FISMA and others that you need to be, compliant with. So it's going to vary from business to business, and there's going to be different limitations that will determine what your strategy is. But I think we all agree that what we need to, guard or protect, obviously are in this list and more. So Jason, you have any more thoughts about what usually businesses have challenges when they come up with the cybersecurity strategy? Obviously, we talked about awareness, training. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of options out there. So what do you see in your world in terms of limitations of investing in a strategy?
Unfortunately, the first thing I see is sometimes business owners think that they're not going to be a target. And that sometimes can be a limitation as far, in my view, is that they think that they're too small to be attacked, and no one's too small to be attacked. And to Daniel's point, based on what country you're in, we're even seeing that change for organizations. My example there is recently there was a breach of a online, I think it was bookings.com. That breach happened in an Arab country. The parent company was in Europe, and so then they levied some of the GDPR against that parent company. So it's constantly evolving. You do need to be aware of those things when you're in different countries or in different states have different privacy laws now. We're seeing stuff pop up in California. We're seeing stuff pop up in New York, New Jersey. So you have to be aware of that. As a business owner, two stories. I worked with a not-for-profit, and their business model was to deliver meals to seniors. And when I talked to them about cybersecurity and even just technology in general, their view of technology was that every dollar they spent on technology was a meal possibly not being able to be delivered. And so it's the education, like, hey, technology can help you be more efficient, but yet you have to have the understanding that you have to protect the information of these seniors. You have names, you have addresses, you have a lot of that PII information that would be very valuable when you think of it in that respect. Then I'm working with a manufacturer who looks at, like, well, if I spend all this money on technology, I could actually be looking at it instead of spending it on technology, I could invest in a new CNC machine and make that a revenue generation for my business. And so a lot of organizations see technology or even cybersecurity as a cost center rather than a profit center. And so that's something that they have to look at that in a different light, is that technology can help them be a profit center by being more efficient. But along those same lines, they have to look at cybersecurity. You have to protect that data. There's a lot of intellectual property. You have a lot of employee information as a business owner, and your data is more valuable than probably some of the products that they're producing or the services they're delivering.
Right. Prasad, I'd like to share a limitation as well that I've actually learned through presentations and things that we've done with Jason and others, and that is business owners talking about the fact that if it's happened to them, it's something that a lot of people aren't talking about. And so you may be in a small rural community and it has happened and it has impacted local businesses, but it's not being talked about because of the liability that may come with it. It may, someone may feel as though their reputation is tarnished if they let too many people know or if they talk about it. And so helping people understand that it is happening, but also having those conversations, because if what we're hearing is it's happening to these large corporations, it's happening to these large businesses, but we don't hear about it happening to the businesses that are in our own communities. It does continue to perpetuate that idea that, well, I'm too small, they're not going to target me. And that's not always the case. So having webinars like this where we are talking about it and helping to educate folks about what is going on, I think there's a lot of work to do, but I think it's helping. It's helping to bring up more of those conversations, as difficult as they are for some.
That's a great point. So if you can't relate it to you or your neighbor, it's hard to really think about it more seriously. Angie, you had a comment?
I do. I also think that education is one of the limitations, and not only education that cybersecurity is something that should be thought about and discussed, but education as to what that small business may need. That small business may not have an IT person, or may not have an IT department, or a cybersecurity person, or a CISO. So they may just not know what they need to protect their small businesses, and they may not know that vendors are out there that will help them with that, do assessments to see what they need, and also to run their IT and their cybersecurity for them. So I think that might be, you just don't know what you don't know. So when you're running a small business, I'm sure you have so many other things to worry about, and that's just kind of on the back burner, when in reality, it should be one of the first things that you do.
Great points, thank you. And James here has a comment which is really, really useful in this discussion. So he says the challenge we face is the time and effort in building a defense. So we work with the federal government, and so we're okay spending money on security, but small business who don't see the need, right? Hard for them to swallow the pill, absolutely. Plus finding businesses that will help you and not make you feel you're being oversold, but feel secure and not being taken advantage. Exactly, so this is the other thing that we said. There is really no limit to how far you can go with security, and you can get really carried away. And companies that sell you security products try to do that in some sense. Having the knowledge, having the plan again, which is very focused, can allow you to really come up with the right security controls, with the right technology and best practices. But it is difficult to, first of all, like Sherry was also saying, related to your own personal situation, and also have the expertise like Angie was talking about in seeking the right kind of solutions, and definitely being in control of what security design you put in place, that you're willing to invest in it. And it's not going to be perfect, and you're willing to live with the risk of whatever security solution you come up with your business. So it's really, thank you, James, for sharing that challenge. Anybody else has any other discussion on this? Okay, so let's go to the part where we do one last stretch of concepts before we wind up our webinar today. So let's talk about how do we go about understanding our cybersecurity gap. So like, how do we know, are we doing enough, or are we doing at least something, or what do I need to do more, right? So here is kind of how we want to think about cybersecurity, right? So we want to think about cybersecurity as a way in which we create a number of measures or controls that ultimately protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our information system assets, which could be hardware, it could be software, it could be our firmware, it could be our data, or anything that we're trying to protect, right? And as we talked about, our systems are dynamic. The data is always dynamic. Our system technologies are dynamic. Our processes as a business are dynamic. So we need to have this ability to cope with cybersecurity in sort of a very dynamic environment. And so obviously the basic ways we need to think about it is, yes, I need to make sure that my data and services are having enough protection, so there's no loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, loss of availability. But what are those assets that I care about, right? What do I need to protect? So that's number one. And then number two, as we said, knowing really what could go wrong, right? How are those assets threatened? And having good knowledge of that and knowing what's going to be the impact is going to be, again, important. And if it's a high impact, then we need to take more action, correct? Versus if it's a low impact, is it okay to ignore it? Because you cannot always solve every problem that potentially could occur in the future. And then what can we do to counter things we know are real issues that we need to protect, or we need to have security solutions in place so that we are able to defend if in fact an incident occurs. So these three terms are going to be, I think, what I call as the most important things you should take away from this talk is we're trying to protect confidentiality, integrity, availability, and you want to think about your threats in these what we call a CIA triad kind of way. So if you can organize your thinking of what could go wrong based on what is probably confidential that could be lost, or what is information that you really do not want compromised, and also making sure what are those systems that have to be running all the time. They have to be available for your business to succeed. And as we said, knowing really what's going to really be the level of disruption that was going to happen when these attacks happen, and are you going to be okay with it, or what are you going to do with it if that disruption actually occurs, right? So the high ones are really things you need to worry about, and obviously the moderate and low ones, we want to have some mechanisms in place, but maybe we cannot afford to do all of it, right? But at least knowing what are your high impact issues that you want to deal with, and what's the plan for that is going to be important. And it turns out that, as we talked already on some of these statistics, right, the human factors are going to be critical. So training your employees is going to be very, very critical. And really thinking about how you implement your online services with security, right? That's going to be important. And how you configure your systems, is again going to be important. And those are some of the critical reasons why systems fail, right? We saw again and again, like with Equifax and other company attacks, that the human factors really are the major issue. And so start with training your employees, start with getting your employees, like we talked about some of these best practices, VPNs, least privileges based on need, and things like that. So those things obviously are going to be important. So you can start with the human, but definitely going into the system and network aspects and knowing what are these high impact threats is going to really help you start preparing a plan, right? So now let's actually go through a little bit of an exercise, and I will share a link of a document here. And let's look at the document for a couple of minutes as a group. And let's see what we all think about it. So I put a link in the chat. Hopefully you can all see that. So I encourage you to pull up that document, and you know, I'll give you like a few minutes to just think about it, and then we'll have a small discussion. So how about a couple of minutes to just look at it? And it's a number of yes/no questions, but also it's something you don't have to answer it all completely right now. But James, I'm trusting this is not a virus now. It's just a Word document which has a questionnaire that could get you started in this route of thinking about your security position. So this is a questionnaire actually we've used with other small businesses in the past. We have at University of Missouri Industrial Assessment Center, where Department of Energy allows the university to help small medium businesses to do an energy audit. But these days, our center also, because of DOE's mandate, is doing some kind of cybersecurity audit. So we kind of ask organizations to think about their security position and then have a discussion with us. And then, obviously there's training involved, there's some consultation involved. And even if you don't send this information to an expert, it's something for you to think about. What's your current situation, right? And what are you doing in terms of a plan, right? Getting started with a plan. So it's important to start here, which is what this whole webinar's theme was, is knowing your security position, right? So this is really the critical first step before you get into a detailed strategy and an investment that goes with implementation of the necessary controls in your organization, right? So you can do that at your leisure, but that was sort of the point of the exercise, is sort of questions that get you thinking about these things, right? And so I think we're almost to the last part, 10 minutes or so to wrap up. Let's go with a couple of key points I think are important to understand. It all comes down to our assets. What are the things, software, hardware, firmware, people in our business that we really want to protect? And knowing who the threat agents are, and we know that they're sophisticated, and knowing what the threats actually do, right, to your business, and knowing that they're small, medium, high, right, and ultimately knowing that what's the risk that you have in your business that you're willing to tolerate or really trying to mitigate, right, as part of your planning. And what are you trying to do in terms of countermeasures, right? So in the case that you will be attacked, or like Jason was saying, you will be attacked, when that happens, not if, but when, what are things that you have that act as countermeasures. And obviously, the big takeaway we saw from Angie's points and Jason's point is prevention is better than cure, right? So we could do the best practices that we could do, but they all, again, are not always going to be the silver bullet, like Jason said, right? But monitoring is going to be critical. And my best example of security is, as I said, I travel a lot. I used to travel a lot as a professor to all places. And, when I'm waiting on a plane to go to Japan, do I need to take my Kohl's credit card, like the Kohl's store, clothing store here in Colombia? Do I need to take that card to Japan? And the answer is no, because the only thing that can happen is I might lose it there and somebody might abuse that card, right? So keeping your, what I call as attack surface as small as possible, keeping things simple, right? Is something that really, at the end of the day, it's common sense, but that's the best way to protect yourself, is not letting yourself be vulnerable to a lot of attack surface or attack vectors, like Jason was saying, from the attacker side, and keeping that as small as possible is good. So if you don't need to run a web server, don't run it. If you don't need to run some services, don't run it, right? So monitor your systems, and that's the best way to at least get started in the prevention route. So Jason and Angie, do you want to add more takeaways to today's talks?
This is Angie. I just want to say that you're right. It's not if, it's when. So like I've been saying, prevention is better. I also want to say thank you to Prasad and his team for allowing me to be on this webinar. And I really appreciate it. And I hope that all the participants really got some education from this webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, and Angie, thank you so much for coming, because I know you're so busy, and she is the lone warrior in the Missouri Homeland Security, as she explained to me, and in the front line of all of these things. And I can't tell you how pleased I am that she agreed to be here, and she's sharing her expertise, her real world experiences. And I'm pretty sure we can talk to Angie all day about what's going on even today in terms of what's pressing in terms of cybersecurity in our state, and how businesses, government, institutions are really having to deal with this ongoing crisis we have, not only with the pandemic, but also because of all these cyber man-made disasters, right, essentially. So Jason, again, please go ahead.
Thank you, Prasad, and I really appreciate you and your team and all the work that you've invested in this, and Sherry with the SBDC, putting this on and hosting it. I'd just like to reiterate that there are a lot of best practices out there. You showed one with the NIST standards. That education of those resources that are available is a great place to start for any organization. I know one of the questions was talking about, how do you feel like if you're being oversold? Well, and Prasad, you handled that exactly correctly, is that you can have too much, right? It's about understanding your risk, and you need to do a risk evaluation that is going to be different for each and every organization. And once you understand your risk, then you can go about protecting that, assuming some of that risk yourself. You can push off some of that risk on an insurance company under the cyber liability policies, or you can start looking at vendors to help assume some of that risk. But that's the first step, is educate yourself, do a risk assessment, and then education is key, not only for the business owners, but for all of the employees. And that is where I challenge everyone that is on this webinar here today is talk to your friends, your peers, and share this information and let them know that it's out there. And I know that Prasad and his team have 4 more upcoming webinars, and I think they're going to be a great resource for the state of Missouri. The state of Missouri, according to that FBI report, we were 7th out of 50 states in money lost, in 2020. And that's just what's reported. I mean, obviously it could go up or down, right? But we lost millions and millions of dollars that just went to the cyber dark hole here. So it is worth protecting.
Thank you, Jason. And again, I can't thank you enough for willing to be here and really add more layers of information and validate some of the things I'm saying. So and your experience is really, really great. And Daniel, you had a question on next session. That's a great thing to stop with. So definitely we have upcoming webinars, and let me see if I can go to the slide. We talk about what's coming up next. So in the second webinar, we will get into the planning of the cybersecurity design principles. So like these best practices, we talked about how to do it in a more formal way. In the third one, we're going to start thinking about monitoring incident response and those kind of aspects. In the fourth one, we're going to talk about putting some defenses in place that help you, proactively, reactively deal with attacks. And we'll show you live demonstrations, case studies from real world applications. And in the fifth one, in each of these, we'll do some amount of risk assessment things, but in the fifth one, we'll actually do a full-blown risk assessment exercise that you could use in your small business. And like Jason was saying, it will be based on NIST guidelines, and the Department of Energy also has a risk assessment kind of a tool that we will use in that exercise. So yes, we will be doing in the future webinars a lot more deep dive on all these aspects that we talked about. So please join us again in the other webinars.